Have you ever sat in an exam or class staring at a programming question like this, but you're completely stuck and you don't know where to start? Well, stick around because I'm going to show you a simple technique that will help you break down any question like this so you can score full marks. Hello and welcome. I'm Mr. Crook and this is Program Mr. Crook, the channel where I help you master programming concepts and ace your exams. In today's video, we're tackling an exam-style programming question and we're going to go through it step by step to gain full marks. By the end of this video, you're going to have a clear strategy on how to approach questions confidently and you'll be able to apply this technique to similar programming questions in the future. So here we've got our main question. So let's read this out. OCR Town are holding an election with 3 candidates, A, B and C. An electronic voting booth will be used to allow people to vote. You need to write an algorithm that allows voters to enter either A, B or C, keep track of how many times each candidate had been voted for. As soon as one person has finished voting, allow the next person to vote. At any point, allow the official to type in end, which will print out the number of votes for each candidate and the total number of votes overall. So it's a 6-mark question. Now, before we kind of dive into this technique, what I'd like you to do is, can you go through this and can you spot any key terms or requirements in this question? Before we try and tackle this, why don't you try and drop these into the comments below. Now, the technique which I'm going to apply here has 5 steps to it. First, we're going to understand the problem. We're going to ensure that we understand what's required of us to get the full marks. We're going to break down this question into manageable steps. We're going to create some variables to help us answer this question. Then we're going to implement the full code. And at the end, once we've written the code, we're going to test our program to make sure it does what we need to do. So understanding problem requirements first of all. Well, I always make sure that I've read the question a couple of times just to make sure I understand what's going in. So it looks like we've got this town called OCR and they're holding an election and we've got candidates A, B and C. So we've got 3 people that we need to keep track of and we're going to be allowing people to vote for them and they can vote for either A, B or C. So we're probably going to need to keep a count of person A, person B and person C. Now, we also want to create some kind of loop, maybe kind of allow people to keep adding their choice X number of times. And at the end of the day, when the voting is finished, whoever's running this can type in end, and that's going to allow the person to print out the results and we can see the total number of votes overall. So let's have a think about what we might need to do. We're probably going to need to have some variables to keep track. We're going to have some kind of loop that's going on. And we're probably going to have some if statement that's going on there and also a stopping condition as well. Well, let's break it down into a couple of steps. So first we need to create some variables. So we're going to be keeping track of these variables that we've got. So I'm going to create a variable and I'm going to call it something sensible. So I'm going to say count A or something like that. I'm just going to make this a different color so it's a little bit easier to see. So I'm just going to say count A and let's set that to 0. Not too sure why that's going like that. So let me just change the color there. And I'm just going to create it just so it's a bit more consistent as well. Now I'm just typing this straight into Word. You could be following along to writing down this onto paper. I'm also going to create another variable for B and I'm going to set that to 0 or assign it the value 0. And I'm also going to create a counter called C and we're going to set that to 0 as well. Now, with these kind of questions, I always think about the person that's going to be reading your answer. Let's just try and make these variable names as clear as possible. Now, it looks like we're going to need some kind of loop that we're going to be going. I'm going to implement that later. Once I've got my loop, I'm going to be asking the user to input their choice. And once they've input their choice, we're going to assign it to the person, either count A, count B, or count C. So let's just say assign choice to the correct variable. So for example, if someone votes for person C, we're going to assign 1 to count C. We also need to check if they have entered end as well. Check if the user has entered end. So what we've done is we've broken it down. We've thought about the variables we might need to use. We're going to think about some loops that we might need to implement. We've thought about some decisions which we're going to add in, and we're also thinking about how the program can stop as well. Now, I'm just going to read back this question as well. So we've got a voting system for these people. We've allowed the voters to enter their choice. We're going to keep track of how many times the candidates have been voted for. We're going to implement that later. We've also checked our end statement, and we've got one more thing at the end, which is where we want to print out the number of votes for each candidate and the total number as well. So I'm just going to write a statement here and just say output votes. Okay. Well, the third step is going to be to create any variables that we might want to use with this problem. I've already done that here, so I'm going to go on to the next bit where I'm going to start implementing the code. Now, I would always make sure that you use clear variable names for this. As I said earlier, you want the examiner to be able to understand what you're thinking about, have some logic in your program as well. And if you've got anything a bit tricky, you can use comments to explain these. So using that plan, which we've got there, I've got my votes here. I'm going to implement the loop first of all. Now, with these kind of programs, you can either write it in the OCR language, or you can just write it in a high-level language that you've studied. Python's usually a pretty good one, so I'm going to go for Python for my one. Now, first up, I'm going to implement my loop. Now, my loop needs to be able to execute until a certain condition has been entered. And I'm going to create a variable called vote for this, and I'm just going to set this to be equal to nothing, basically. So I'm going to say 0, and I'm going to say that 1 vote, and we're going to give it a condition that's going to keep looping. I'm going to say while it's not equal to end, I'm going to be doing the following things. Now, indentation is always going to be key with this, so make sure it's really clear. I'm just going to go for about 3 or 4 spaces in here. In Python, it will automatically indent for you. And we also do need to include a colon here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the user to enter a vote. I'm not going to worry about any casting or storing it as an integer or anything, because we just want to get some values into the program. So I'm going to use the input command, which is what we'd use in Python. And I'm going to say, please enter either A, B, or C, or end to, let's just say, to stop the program running. Don't really need to do that, so let's just pop in like this. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create some if statements. So I'm going to say, well, if they enter the value A, so if vote equals A, then we are going to increment count A by 1. Now, there's 2 ways you can write this. You can either say count A is going to be plus equal 1, or if you want to keep it nice and simple, you can say count A is going to be equal to itself plus 1. If you think about an exam, what's going to take you or save you some time. Now, we're also going to do an elif statement here. So I'm going to say elif vote, and you might be able to kind of work out what's going on here. I'm going to say, well, if the choice that they enter is now B, we're going to increment count B by 1 as well. So I'm going to say count B, and we could do it like this, or again, just to keep it simple for you guys, count B, we're going to do plus 1. Now my next value needs to be my value for C. So I'm just going to create some space down here, just so we can see what we've got. We're doing an elif statement. I'm going to do count C. It's going to be equal to itself plus 1. Now, if we were to test this, I've got a little bit ahead of myself there. So the vote is going to be, So what we've got is we've got our first 2 entries for vote A and B. The next one we need to do is going to be for vote C. So I'm just going to make sure this is in line with everything that I'm doing here. And I'm going to say if vote equals C, and count C is going to be equal to itself plus 1. Again, I'm just going to make sure that the variables match up, otherwise it won't work. So far, that's looking like we've got that going okay. Now, the next thing I need to do is I could have a variable to keep this loop running. I've just said that while vote is not equal to end, it's going to keep executing this. So if the user enters end, this loop is going to stop running. So I do not need to worry too much about that. So what I've got so far is I've got my loop, I've got my input choice being assigned to the correct place, and if the user enters end, that's automatically going to break out of the loop. Now my final part is just going to be to output those votes. So I'm going to use a print statement. Let's put this on a new line just so it's a bit clearer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say votes A. And again, we just need to pop out that variable of count A. I'm also going to output the value for votes B. Just going to stop my fat fingers being a bit silly there. Let's pop count B. And then finally, we're also going to output votes for C. And the final thing we need to do is output our total number of votes as well. So I'm just going to say output, well, a print statement, sorry. And let's just say total. And there's a couple of ways we could do this. We could create a variable to add votes A, B, and C together. But I'm just going to simply just do count A plus count B plus count C. Now, we've implemented our code. We've got a couple of things which we just need to add in. So I'm just going to add in some sample data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just test if this works. And if I run this through, I could create a trace table to do this, or I could just run it through in my head. I'm going to add some values in. So I'm going to vote for person A, B, and C once, and then I'm going to press end. And I should get one value for each of those being calculated. And I should also get the total of 3 if I run that through. So all of these will be set to 0, which we've got here. We're then going to run our program, and we've got this statement here. This is saying while vote is not equal to end, we're going to ask the user to input a value. Now, if they enter either A, B, or C, it should increment each one by 1. So let's say that I set the variable vote to be equal to A. That means that count A should be incremented by 1. Excellent. Okay. We're now going to loop that back around. We're going to ask the user to vote one more time. I'm going to put in the value B now. So B's been entered, so count B has come up with 1 value. I'm going to loop this back around, and we're going to vote for person C now. And C is going to be incremented by 1. And the final time that I run this, I'm now going to enter the value end. So I'm going to do end as all capitals. And we've got this condition here that we're only going to assign 1 to the counts for each value if it's either A, B, or C. Because that's not the case, the program's then going to evaluate, well, is this condition now true? Well, this condition is now true because vote is equal to end, and we're going to exit out of this loop, and then we're going to execute these 4 lines of code just here. We're going to print out the values for A, B, and C, and as well total, so we should get the correct values. We could also test it through ourselves a couple of times, enter in some other values, but I'm quite confident that that is going to work. So let's have a look at what we've looked at so far. So we've started understanding this question. Let's just have a look at this question again. We've broken it down into a series of manageable steps. We created the necessary variables which we want to use for this program, and we wrote a solution, and we tested our program out. Now that's great. If you follow those 5 steps to these programming questions, you can essentially answer any of these programming questions that OCR throw at you. Now I'm also just going to show you the mark scheme here, which is also from OCR, just to have a look at what we've got. Now they've used quite a similar concept of what I've got, just to show you how the marks are going to be distributed. So as long as you create these variables A, B, and C, and you set them to 0, you get 1 mark. As long as you allow input from the user, that gets you that 2nd mark. So far, we've got 1 mark here for creating the variables, and we're also getting an input from the user. So that's got us 2. If we increment A, B, and C, depending on the input, we get our 3rd mark. Well, we've got that happening here. Let's have a look at the next part as well. As long as it repeats, we've got that loop being implemented, so that's going to repeat. And only stopping when end is entered will get us that 5th mark. And to get the final mark, it needs to print out all 3 individual counts and the total being calculated. They've also given us some sample code there, which we can see. We can see that being implemented. I also find it quite useful just to sort of read the examiner comments in these questions. Now, this is a little bit dull for a video, so we're not going to dive into that today. But really well done if you managed to answer that question. Why don't you try applying this technique that I've just shown you to different questions, especially these bigger 6-mark programming questions. If you feel confident, you could even write out some of your own questions and put those into the comments. I'd love to check those out. If this video helped you, hit the like button. It really supports the channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss my next programming tutorial or exam breakdown. And if you need practice, check out my extensive program resources, where you'll find a link in the description to my exam revision worksheets and coding exercises to help you level out even faster. If you found today's video useful, I'm just going to point you to the direction of my TES page. I've got a load of programming guides on here, a load of programming questions for you to practice. This is perfect for a teacher or a student that wants to brush up on their Python skills. There's also some free samples on there, or you've got the option of buying the full version as well. I'll put a link in the description. Any click or any purchase really helps out the channel. Thank you so much.